Alright, listen up, because we're about to dive into some of the most intense, pivotal moments in military history. We're talking about battles waged not on land or sea, but in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the sky. For the brave souls who climbed into those cockpits, every single second was a razor's edge. A split-second decision that could mean the difference between becoming a hero or just another name lost to the wind. Predator or prey, life or death. These weren't just skirmishes. These were the ultimate air battles. They didn't just turn the tide of a single engagement. They literally rewrote the course of history itself. So buckle in, because we're going to explore how air power evolved from a nascent concept to the absolute linchpin of modern warfare. Battle of Britain, 1940. Imagine the scene. It's the summer of 1940. Western Europe, it's fallen swallowed whole by the relentless Nazi war machine. The British Expeditionary Force, what's left of it, has limped home from the beaches of Dunkirk, leaving behind most of its equipment. Britain stands alone, an island nation staring across the Channel at Hitler's triumphant armies. Their next target? The British Isles. But first, they need to soften things up. Hermann Göring, the puffed-up head of the Luftwaffe, practically guarantees the Führer that his mighty air force will smash the Royal Air Force, flatten Britain's airfields, and clear the way for an invasion in a mere 4 days. Talk about overconfidence. But what Göring didn't fully grasp, what Hitler underestimated, was that he wasn't just fighting an air force. He was fighting an entire nation's ingenuity and grit. Instead of an easy victory, he met something truly revolutionary: radar. For the very first time in history, an entire national air defense system wasn't just a collection of scattered units. It was a meticulously stitched together network, a symphony of technology and human coordination. A chain of radio towers dotting the British coastline could see the enemy forming up over France, long before they even crossed the Channel. This wasn't guesswork. This was real-time intelligence. This early warning system, combined with a vast network of ground observers, fed crucial data into underground sector control rooms. There, women with long wooden rakes plotted the altitude, speed, and heading of incoming Luftwaffe raids on massive display tables. Then, with almost surgical precision, they vectored their Spitfires and Hurricanes into position, like chess pieces on a grand, deadly board. Now, let's be fair, the Germans certainly had advantages. They boasted more aircraft, their bombers had better range, and many of their pilots were combat-seasoned veterans from the Spanish Civil War and the Blitzkrieg across Europe. But every single time they crossed the British coast, they were met not by surprised, scrambling fighters, but by squadrons that had already climbed to the perfect altitude, often with the sun at their backs ready to pounce. It was a tactical masterpiece, allowing a numerically inferior force to consistently engage the enemy on its own terms. The battle raged for months, a brutal test of endurance and skill. The RAF pilots, dubbed the Few by Winston Churchill, flew multiple sorties a day, landing, refueling, rearming, and taking off again, sometimes within minutes, to face the next wave. The pressure was immense, the stakes unimaginable. The turning point, the day that truly sealed Britain's fate and shattered Göring's promises, came on September 15th. It's now famously commemorated as Battle of Britain Day. That day, the Luftwaffe launched 2 absolutely massive raids, 230 bombers, heavily escorted by over 600 fighters, all heading directly for London. Britain's No. 11 Group, the primary defender of the capital, threw everything it had left into the sky. The air above southeast England became a maelstrom of twisting, diving, firing aircraft. In just 20 frenetic minutes, the Luftwaffe lost an astonishing 60 aircraft. You can almost hear the shift in tone. German aircrew radio chatter, which had started with arrogant confidence, devolved into frantic calls for rescue, pleas for help from comrades who were now just burning wrecks falling from the sky. That very night, a telling sign of defeat emerged. The invasion barges, massed at Calais, quietly turned back upriver. Hitler shelved Operation Sea Lion, his plan to invade Britain for good. Strategically, the Battle of Britain stands as the first unambiguous defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. It proved that even against a seemingly unstoppable force, determination, superior tactics, and critical technological advantages could hold the line. Tactically, it was a revelation. It demonstrated conclusively that a smaller, technologically integrated air force using a centralized command and control system could effectively defeat a much larger opponent. The cost to the Luftwaffe was staggering, an estimated 1,700 aircraft and, more importantly, some 2,200 irreplaceable veteran pilots. From this point on, every single German operation, every grand strategic plan, had to be mounted with one eye nervously fixed on the sky. The era of unchallenged air superiority for the Axis was over. Big Week, February 1944. Let's fast forward 4 years. The world is still locked in the deadliest conflict in human history, but the tide is beginning to turn. The Allies are gearing up for the monumental task of opening the second front, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. But before a single boot could hit those beaches, before any tank could roll inland, they needed one thing above all else: absolute, undeniable air superiority. Without it, any invasion would be a bloodbath. Vulnerable to constant Luftwaffe attacks, enter General Carl Spaatz of the U.S. Army Air Forces and Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris of the RAF, along with Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal. They devised a daring, brutal plan called Operation Argument, later famously nicknamed Big Week. The objective was simple, yet incredibly ambitious: destroy the German aircraft industry. For 6 straight grueling days, from February 20th to 25th, 1944, a staggering force of 3,300 American and British heavy bombers pounded German factories, airfields, and assembly plants. These weren't just random targets. They were the very heart of the Luftwaffe's ability to wage war. But this time, the bombers weren't alone. For the first time, long-range P-51 Mustang fighters, equipped with external drop tanks that dramatically extended their combat radius, appeared over the Reich, deep within German airspace. This was a game-changer. The P-51, with its incredible speed and maneuverability, could now go all the way to the targets and back, protecting the vulnerable bombers. The Luftwaffe had to respond. They couldn't let their factories be annihilated without a fight. Legendary German aces, the expert 10 like Hermann Graf and Günter Rall, climbed into their FW-190s and Bf-109s, ready to defend their homeland. But as they climbed to meet the Allied formations at 25,000 feet and higher, they encountered a terrifying new reality. The P-51 Mustangs, these sleek, powerful American fighters, could outdive, outclimb, and often outrun anything the Germans had in their hangars. The sky over Germany became a vast, brutal arena. The numbers tell a stark story. Over 600 German fighters were destroyed during Big Week, and more than 200 experienced pilots were killed or wounded, while German factories, with their immense industrial capacity, managed to replace many of the lost airframes relatively quickly. They could not replace the human element. They couldn't magically conjure up hundreds of highly trained, combat-hardened pilots. The Luftwaffe never recovered from this decimation of its irreplaceable human capital. The impact was profound and immediate. When D-Day finally arrived just 4 months later, on June 6, 1944, the Wehrmacht's ground commanders, desperately fighting for their lives against the Allied invasion, would request air cover, and what they received time and time again was deafening silence. The Luftwaffe, once the terrifying spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, had been effectively broken, its wings clipped by the relentless, strategic assault of Big Week. Air superiority over the invasion beaches was firmly in Allied hands, a crucial prerequisite for the success of the largest amphibious invasion in history. Philippine Sea, June 1944. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, in the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, the United States was relentlessly island-hopping its way toward Japan. Each captured island brought them closer to the Japanese home islands, closer to victory. But the Imperial Japanese Navy, despite its mounting losses, wasn't ready to concede. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the combined fleet, saw one last desperate chance to break the American carrier force, to turn the tide. He mustered an impressive force, 9 carriers bristling with 430 aircraft, crewed by the elite of Japan's naval air groups. These were the best they had left, their most experienced pilots and aircraft, poised for a decisive showdown. Opposing him was the formidable U.S. Navy's Task Force 58, a colossal armada of 15 carriers carrying over 900 aircraft. But it wasn't just about numbers. The Americans had several crucial advantages: superior aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat, radar-guided combat air patrols that provided invaluable early warning, and a terrifying new weapon, the proximity-fused anti-aircraft shell. This shell didn't need a direct hit. It exploded when it sensed it was near an aircraft, turning every burst of anti-aircraft fire into a deadly shotgun blast in the sky. The morning of June 19th dawned, clear and hot. Ozawa launched his attack, sending 4 waves of Japanese aircraft towards the American fleet. But American radar, their eyes in the sky, picked them up at eye, staggering 150 miles out. This early warning was critical, giving the Hellcats of Task Force 58 ample time to launch, climb to altitude, and position themselves for interception. What followed was an aerial slaughter so one-sided it earned a grim, unforgettable nickname, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The sky became a killing zone. In the first wave of Japanese attackers, 42 out of 69 aircraft were shot down. The second wave fared even worse, losing 97 of its 128 planes. The Hellcats, faster, more heavily armed, and often flown by pilots with more training and experience, tore through the Japanese formations. Japanese pilots, many of them relatively green and flying older, less capable aircraft, were simply no match for the American air crews and their advanced technology. By nightfall, the scale of the Japanese defeat was catastrophic. Japan had lost approximately 600 planes, along with 3 crucial aircraft carriers. American losses, in stark contrast, were a mere 123 aircraft, and the vast majority of those were due to operational accidents during frantic deck landing recoveries in the dark, not from enemy action. The Battle of the Philippine Sea decisively ended Japan's carrier aviation as a strategic force. It wasn't just about the planes or the carriers. It was the irreplaceable loss of their highly trained air crews. From this point forward, until the very last desperate days leading up to Okinawa, American pilots would increasingly face the terrifying, suicidal attacks of kamikazes. But they would never again encounter a coherent, organized Japanese air group capable of challenging their dominance in the Pacific skies. The balance of power in the air and by extension at sea had shifted irrevocably. Kursk, July 1943. When we talk about the Eastern Front in World War II, we often think of vast tank battles, and rightly so. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 was indeed the largest tank clash in history, a titanic struggle of steel and fire. But what's often overlooked is that this earth-shaking ground battle was mirrored by an equally ferocious, massive aerial arm wrestling match above. Both the Germans and the Soviets knew with chilling clarity that whoever owned the sky above the Kursk salient would ultimately own the salient itself. The German commitment was substantial. Some 2,000 aircraft were massed to cover their audacious drive towards Kursk, hoping to encircle the Soviet forces. But the Soviets, equally aware of the stakes, had assembled an even larger force, some 2,400 aircraft ready to defend their homeland. This wasn't just about supporting ground troops. It was about outright air superiority. On the opening morning, July 5th, the air exploded with activity. German Stukas, those terrifying dive bombers, and the heavily armored Henschel HS-129 tank busters screamed over the vast rolling steppe at just 200 feet, searching for Soviet armor. In the very same airspace, Soviet Il-2 Sturmoviks, armored like flying tanks themselves, known for their incredible resilience and ground attack capabilities, were also wreaking havoc. The sky above the front lines was a dizzying, deadly chaos. Dogfights erupted at treetop level, a desperate, swirling ballet of combat between fighters and ground attack planes alike. The Luftwaffe, with its still formidable Expert 10, initially claimed considerable success, reporting 447 Soviet aircraft downed in the first brutal 48 hours. But the Red Air Force was a different beast than the Luftwaffe had encountered in the West. It was seemingly inexhaustible, constantly feeding in fresh regiments of aircraft and pilots from the Moscow military district, throwing wave after wave into the fray. Their sheer numerical superiority and willingness to absorb losses eventually began to tell. By July 12th, the intensity had taken its toll. The Germans had lost 290 aircraft. More critically, they had lost around 200 veteran pilots. This wasn't just a number. It was a devastating blow to the Luftwaffe's remaining experienced cadre on the Eastern Front. Unlike the Soviets, who could replenish their ranks with relative speed, German pilot training was already stretched thin. These losses were, once again, largely irreplaceable. With the Luftwaffe's grip on the sky weakening, Soviet ground attack crews in their tough Il-2s began to roam more freely. They smashed German Tigers and Panthers, the formidable new German tanks, with their powerful 23mm cannons and devastating PTAB hollow-charge bomblets. This direct air support was instrumental in blunting the German armored thrusts and turning the tide on the ground. The Battle of Kursk marked a permanent shift. The Red Army seized the initiative on the Eastern Front and, thanks in no small part to the hard-won air superiority, they never lost it again. It was a testament to the brutal attritional nature of Eastern Front warfare, where even the sky was contested with unparalleled ferocity. Midway, June 1942. In the annals of naval warfare, few battles are as legendary or as utterly decisive as Midway. But while it was a naval battle, its outcome was decided almost entirely in the air. This wasn't just a clash of fleets. It was a triumph of intelligence, audacity, and aerial prowess. The invisible wingman in this fight was intelligence itself. American codebreakers working tirelessly had cracked Japan's JN-25 naval cipher. This allowed them to know with remarkable precision that the next major Japanese strike would fall on a tiny, strategically vital atoll named Midway, located about 300 miles northwest of Hawaii. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, knew this was a gamble but a calculated one. Despite being outnumbered in carriers, he positioned his three available flat tops, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, which had been miraculously repaired in a mere 72 hours after being heavily damaged at Coral Sea, northeast of Midway, out of sight of Japanese reconnaissance. Then he waited. At EU 4:30 on June 4th, the Japanese strike began. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the Japanese carrier force, launched 108 aircraft against Midway Island itself, hoping to soften it up for an invasion. His escorting A-6M0 fighters, legendary for their maneuverability, swept the defending American F-4F Wildcats from the sky over the island. But this initial success was a trap. The Americans, despite suffering heavy losses, kept coming in piecemeal attacks from Midway's airfields and from the American carriers. These seemingly uncoordinated assaults, though costly, had a crucial effect. They pulled the Japanese combat air patrol, their defending Zeros, down to sea level, engaging them in low-altitude dogfights. This left the skies above Nagumo's carriers dangerously exposed. At 10:20, the moment of truth arrived. Unopposed, a wave of Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown appeared overhead. What followed was arguably the most devastating 4 minutes in naval history. With the Japanese flight decks cluttered with rearmed and refueled aircraft and bombs and fuel hoses strewn about, the dauntless pilots plunged through the sky. 4 minutes later, a terrifying sight unfolded. The Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning hulks, their decks ripped apart by bombs, their magazines exploding. A fourth Japanese carrier, Hiryu, managed a desperate counterattack, launching aircraft that crippled the USS Yorktown. But by sunset, she too was found and sunk by American dive bombers. The Battle of Midway was an unmitigated catastrophe for Japan. They lost 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers, some 250 aircraft, and perhaps most critically, over 3,000 highly trained crewmen and, most importantly, the cadre of veteran pilots and maintenance crews who had won at Pearl Harbor just 6 months prior. These were the best of the best, and their loss was a blow from which Japanese naval aviation would never truly recover. The strategic initiative in the Pacific, which Japan had held since Pearl Harbor, passed permanently to the United States. It was the turning point of the Pacific War, a victory forged in the skies over a tiny atoll, El Mansoura, October 1973. Fast forward to the tense geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. It's October 1973, and the Yom Kippur War has just erupted, catching Israel by surprise on 2 fronts. On the ground, Israeli armored spearheads are racing desperately to relieve a trapped garrison on the Golan Heights. But to the south along the Suez Canal, a formidable challenge looms. Egyptian surface-to-air missile, SAM belts, a dense and deadly array, protect the newly established Egyptian bridgeheads. These SAMs were designed to deny the Israeli Air Force, IAF, the air superiority it had so easily enjoyed in previous conflicts. On October 14th, the IAF launched a massive preemptive strike. Israeli Phantoms and Skyhawks screamed towards Egyptian airfields near the town of El Mansoura, aiming to neutralize the Egyptian Air Force, EAF, and clear the way for their ground forces. They expected to quickly establish air dominance, but the Egyptians were ready. They responded with every available MiG-21 and their newer, more agile MiG-17s, many fitted with deadly K-13 air-to-air missiles. What ensued was one of the largest and most intense air battles of the jet age. For 53 minutes, more than 160 aircraft, a dizzying mix of American-made jets and Soviet-made MiGs, twisted and turned in a sky that, in aerial terms, was no bigger than a postage stamp. It was a chaotic, high-speed ballet of evasion and attack. The exact score of the battle remains contentious, a testament to the fog of war and national pride. Israeli records listed the raid as a tactical success, claiming a favorable kill ratio. Egyptian logs, however, recorded 17 Israeli aircraft downed for the loss of only 7 MiGs, celebrating it as a significant victory. Whatever the precise tally, the impact was undeniable. The sheer ferocity of the Egyptian resistance and the unexpected losses sustained by the IAF forced the Israeli Air Force to divert critical resources from the Syrian front. This diversion bought the Egyptians a precious 24 hours, enough time to consolidate their bridgeheads across the Suez Canal and solidify their gains. The Battle of El Mansoura became a national legend in Egypt, a powerful symbol of their ability to stand against a technologically superior foe. It also served as a textbook case study for military strategists worldwide, demonstrating how a smaller, well-prepared air force, fighting defensively over its own territory, could impose prohibitive costs on an adversary, even one with advanced technology. It was a stark reminder that courage, tactics, and local advantage could still challenge even the most dominant air power. Operation Mole Cricket 19. June 1982, just a few years later, another conflict erupted in the Middle East, and once again, air power would play a pivotal, redefining role. This time it was the 1982 Lebanon War, and Syria had spent a decade building what was considered the densest, most sophisticated surface-to-air missile, SAM, wall in the world. 19 battalions of SA-2s, SA-3s, and the particularly dangerous mobile SA-6s were stretched across the Bekaa Valley, creating an impenetrable no-fly zone for any Israeli aircraft. Israeli planners knew this was a critical obstacle. If they couldn't dismantle this SAM network, their ground thrust into Lebanon would be a bloody, costly affair. What followed was Operation Mole Cricket 19, an air campaign so revolutionary it literally rewrote the rules of modern air warfare. The Israelis didn't just attack head-on. They orchestrated a symphony of deception, electronic warfare, and precision strikes. On June 9th, Israeli F-15s and F-16s acted as bait, flying provocative patterns to lure Syrian MiGs into the sky. But the real stars of the show were unseen. Modified Boeing 707s, packed with advanced electronic jamming equipment, flooded Syrian radars with false signals. Simultaneously, waves of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs or drones, were sent flying directly at the SAM sites, spoofing their radars into thinking they were attacking fighter jets. The Syrian SAM operators, confused by the jamming and detecting what they believed were incoming Israeli aircraft, activated their radars and fired their missiles at the drones. This was the trap. By emitting their radar signals, the SAM sites inadvertently revealed their exact locations and frequencies. This critical information was instantly relayed to the Israeli command center, and then to their F-4 Phantom Wild Weasel aircraft, designed specifically for suppressing enemy air defenses. The result was devastatingly swift and overwhelmingly effective. Within 2 hours, 29 of the 30 Syrian SAM sites in the Bekaa Valley were smoking ruins, annihilated by precision-guided munitions, and in the ensuing air combat, 82 Syrian MiGs were shot down for 0 Israeli losses. It was an astonishing, almost unbelievable victory. Operation Mole Cricket 19 demonstrated a profound shift in military strategy. Electronic warfare was no longer just a supporting element. It was the spearhead, the primary weapon that neutralized the enemy's defenses and opened the door for conventional air power. It showcased the absolute dominance of integrated air defense suppression, combining intelligence deception, electronic countermeasures, and precision strikes. This operation didn't just win a battle. It fundamentally changed how modern air forces would approach contested airspace, proving that with technological superiority and meticulous planning, Even the densest air defenses could be overcome. Black Thursday, April 1951. Moving from the warm deserts of the Middle East to the frozen skies of Korea, we find ourselves in MiG Alley, a stretch of airspace over northwest Korea that became the crucible for the world's first sustained jet vs. jet combat. This was where the American F-86 Sabres clashed with the Soviet-built MiG-15s, often secretly flown by experienced Soviet pilots who had clandestinely entered the war. It was a new era, a new kind of aerial warfare. On April 12, 1951, a truly audacious mission was launched. A formation of 44 B-29 Superfortress heavy bombers, escorted by some 100 F-86 fighters, headed for the strategically vital Yalu River bridges, aiming to cut off supplies to the North Korean and Chinese forces. Soviet radar, however, picked them up, and a massive response was ordered. 80 MiG-15s scrambled to intercept. What followed was a brutal, swirling battle in the cold, thin air between 30,000 and 40,000 feet. The bombers, facing overwhelming numbers, dumped their load short and turned for home, their mission effectively aborted. But their escorts, the F-86 Sabres, found themselves desperately outnumbered, almost 2-to-1 against the fast-climbing, high-flying MiGs. The combat was intense and fast-paced, a stark departure from the propeller-driven dogfights of World War II. Sabres claimed 11 MiGs for 3 losses. Soviet records, as is often the case in such intense engagements, told a different story, admitting to 6 MiGs lost while claiming to have downed 9 B-29s and 4 Sabres. Whatever the exact tally, the implications were clear and chilling for the United States Air Force. This day, forever known as Black Thursday, delivered a sobering truth. Unescorted daylight bombing missions against determined jet fighter opposition were effectively dead. The B-29s, once the queens of the skies, were simply too vulnerable. From that night on, B-29 switched almost exclusively to night radar raids, hoping the darkness would offer them some protection. The F-86, while a formidable fighter, needed an upgrade. It soon received an up-engined F-86F variant, specifically designed to match the MiG's superior altitude performance. Korea, and particularly MiG Alley, became the ultimate laboratory where the tactics and technologies of supersonic air combat were born and refined. It was where pilots learned the hard lessons of jet warfare, lessons that would shape air forces and aircraft design for decades to come. The era of the piston engine fighter was definitively over. The jet age had arrived, and it was fast, deadly, and unforgiving. Conclusion: from the revolutionary radar-guided Spitfires twisting over the Kent countryside in 1940 to the electronically cloaked F-16s, systematically dismantling air defenses over the Bekaa Valley in the 1980s. These air battles weren't just isolated incidents of aerial combat. They were profound turning points that did far more than just wreck hangars and burn fuel. They fundamentally rewrote the assumptions of every general staff on Earth, forcing a complete re-evaluation of military doctrine and strategy. The core lesson, hammered home again and again across different continents and decades, is this: air superiority is no longer a luxury. It's not a nice-to-have. It is unequivocally the hinge upon which land and sea campaigns swing. Without control of the skies, ground forces are vulnerable, naval fleets are exposed, and strategic objectives become infinitely harder, often impossible to achieve. The ability to control the airspace above a battlefield provides a critical advantage, enabling close air support, rapid troop and supply movement, and crucial reconnaissance, all while denying these same capabilities to the enemy. The men and women who fought in these skies, the pilots who strapped themselves into those machines, never had the option of a quiet day at the office. Every single sortie was a coin flip, a moment of truth where they could either become an ace, a name etched into history, or become just another name on a memorial, a ghost in the clouds. Their bravery, their skill, their sacrifices, and the innovations forged in those crucible moments have left an indelible legacy. That legacy isn't just a collection of stories. It's the very world map we recognize today, shaped by the outcomes of these ultimate air battles. If you learned something new, or if one of these incredible stories really resonated with you, do us a favor, give this video a thumbs up. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us which battle we should cover next, or share your thoughts on these epic clashes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's most pivotal moments.